Well, Tom and I got to try a case last week. That's exciting for us. We always like doing that. We're trial lawyers, spend a lot of time preparing for it, but we don't get to do it all that often because typically cases settle. But this one did not, at least not up front. It was a car wreck case resulting in wrongful death. The collision occurred at the intersection in South DeKalb of Memorial Drive and Hearthstone Drive here in Atlanta. Um, when the case first came in, we weren't so sure that it's one we'd be able to help on. The decedent, that is our client's mother, she was 76 years old, was making a left turn through this intersection when a car coming straight hit her, essentially T-boned her, really. And the initial police report put fault on the decedent because, left turn, right of way goes the person going straight. But as we did some more work on the case that we'll tell you about, it started to look stronger and stronger. And it turned out that it was mostly the fault, or we thought entirely the fault, the jury thought at least mostly the fault of the at-fault driver. So we tried the case, ended up with the case settled while the jury was out. We settled for $10 million. And then we found out later when we talked to the jurors, they were 10 seconds away from returning a verdict of $23 million, apportioned 75% to the defendant. But the settlement's a good figure, and now we don't have to wait for appeal. And given the posture of this case, we don't have to go through the second case, which would have been the defendant against her insurer, Allstate, who had failed to accept an offer when they should have. But when a case comes in and it looks bad, and then you figure out that it's actually a good case, that usually tells you that good witness work was done. What do you think there, Mr. Giannotti?
I would say so. The witnesses really sort of broke this case open for us. I mean, we, like Jeb said, the initial police report had put the fault on Ms. Minor, and our clients were really searching for answers, I think, at this point. So I talked with the investigating officer, who sort of exactly as Jeb said, well, she's turning left, or right away goes to the person with the straight green light, and that's about it. Didn't really, actually the body camera footage from the police had said, well, everybody speeds this intersection. They knew that there was some indication of speed, but I don't think they really dug as deep, at least at first. So what we did was talked with several witnesses. One I actually met out at the scene, and he walked me through everything that happened. Another witness I talked to over the phone. We did a recorded statement. And then there was another witness who we didn't learn of until later, but who also confirmed, that the at-fault driver had sped very fast past him and then made a double lane change swerve to the right, which we'll see in a moment here with this with a computerized animation that we put together based on this witness testimony. But it wasn't until later in the case that we were able to obtain the what we call the black box or EDR download of the defendant's vehicle, which showed that she was going 73 miles an hour in a 45 mile an hour zone. And it was only based on that data that the police ended up filing criminal charges against the defendant as well.
Yeah. So after Tom went out and found the scene witnesses, the eyewitnesses who could say what happened, we hired a reconstruction expert to put all that together, along with the physical evidence like the gouge marks and tire marks and crush patterns on the vehicles, and come up with an animation of what happened. Animations like this can be really good because they summarize the collision. They're also expensive as rip. It costs $30,000-$40,000 to get one, in addition to all the expert fees. So hire lawyers who believe in your case, because that money is lost if you don't ultimately win. Anyway, let's take a look at that animation. Here we go. We will start with just an overview of the intersection. Memorial Drive, Hearthstone Drive, and South DeKalb, date of the collision. It was a clear day. This is the defendant's car, 2008 Ford Taurus. She's passing the car just before the intersection, swerves off, double lane change to the right, and then boom. Hits our client who was attempting to make that left turn. We'll see it again in slow motion. We knew from the black box or EDR that at this phase, as she's passing the other car, she's going to go to the left lane, back to the right. She's actually into the throttle. Like, even though around this point, our client's already turning, defendant Cherry is mashing the gas, accelerating up to 73, and then does this double lane change, and then there's the collision. The evidence showed that if she had not been speeding, there would have been no collision. Evidence showed that if the defendant, Nakia Cherry, had not made that double lane change to the right, no collision. But she did both things. The evidence also showed that Miss Cherry was on the phone at the time of the collision. Tom subpoenaed her cell phone records, and we hired, in addition to the accident reconstructionist, a human factors expert who talks about how people react to what they perceive. And here he was able to look at those phone records and compare them to the times and learn that the defendant was on the phone at the time of the collision. Here we have estimated crash time of 16:10, that's 4:10 Eastern in the afternoon, so 4:10 p.m. And then we go down here and you can see this topmost call. Unfortunately, they put the red bar on it, but it's a call that lasts for 100 seconds and started at, if you convert it to Eastern time, 4:08 and 27 seconds. So that call went from 4:08:27 to 4:10 and 7 seconds. So that call, she's on the phone at the moment of collision, which explains, we think, why she didn't brake until so late. The EDR also showed us that the defendant didn't start braking until 1 second before this collision, which is crazy late. It shows that she wasn't paying attention. Still, though, you face some challenges because the defendant did have the right-of-way. Our client was supposed to yield, but we were able to look at Georgia law and find out what right-of-way means and make a good argument to the jury as to why they should hold the defendant liable, which ultimately they were prepared to do. But that's only part of the case, right? So proving that the other person's at fault is important. We also have to show the jury what the loss was. What does it mean that Rosie Minor was killed? Who was Rosie Minor? So we talked a lot about that because the jury not only has to know whether to come back with a verdict for us, but how big to make that verdict. And when someone is 76 years old, the annuity mortality tables show us that the person doesn't have that much longer to live. So how do we express to the jury what a big loss it was to lose that tail end of Rosie Minor's life? So what do we do, Tom?
Yeah, so we try to tell our client's story through what we would call damages witnesses. So these are folks who would include our client's two daughters, as well as people from her church, who told the jury about just what an incredible person Rosie Minor was, and how selfless she was, and how she dedicated so much of her time to lifting other people up. And, of course, all of us who are in our younger years, we work our whole lives to try to get to that point of, being in our golden years and being able to enjoy the things that we want to do. And for Rosie Minor, that was helping other people and helping other people become a better version of themselves. And that's ultimately what the evidence showed. So we had her pastor and one of the women from her church who is on the mother's board of Clarkson First Baptist Church with Mrs. Minor. We also had her surviving husband and, again, her two daughters that told the jury about all of the outreach activities and volunteer work that Mrs. Minor did. She ran a prayer line every morning at 7 a.m. every weekday morning, which her daughter Stacy continued.
What's the prayer line?
So I'm ashamed to admit I didn't know this before the trial. But it's something where it's a conference call, essentially, where people from all over the country, really all over the world, can call in and pray together. And actually, we'll get to this, but after the case, the defendant actually called into the prayer line. We'll talk about that story in a little bit. But in addition to the prayer line, Mrs. Minor ran a prison ministry. She would go in and minister to inmates. She would do the same thing for something called Positive Growth, which is a boys' home sort of alternative to, or an intervention, if you will, to young men who are sort of already gotten in trouble with the law, and they're trying to keep them from going down the wrong path. And Mrs. Minor also volunteered at a women's shelter in downtown Atlanta. And there's just so many stories that we heard at the trial, just remarkable stories of her giving people second and more chances in their lives. And it was just really a story of forgiveness, which I think Jeb will talk about some more.
In addition to presenting testimony from witnesses, we can put in pictures, enter pictures into evidence. This is Rosie Minor as a mother at Clarkston First Baptist. She's on her way to church. Here's a picture of Mrs. Minor and some family. She had 4 surviving kids, 9 grandkids, and some great grandkids. There she is in the middle with some daughters and granddaughters. And here she is at her 75th birthday, being funny and reversing the balloons. But she was 76 when she died. This was the birthday before, when 20 or 25 people from her family gathered in South Florida to be together and to celebrate her. We were able to share some of that with the jury. One of the coolest things about this case is that we felt like the legacy of Rosie Minor, leader of the prayer line, mother at her church, and ordained minister, and the whole rest of it, her legacy really meant something, because it's an emotional case. We're sitting there at the table with her daughter, who loved her more than anything, who's having to hear the story of her death, and one table over is the woman who killed her, Nakia Cherry. But they connected, and early on in the trial, before Tom even knew, they had hugged in the hall. And Miss Cherry told our client, Stacy Green, she said, "I'm sorry." And Stacy said, "I forgive you." And then after everything was over, they connected again, and the trial ended on a Thursday. The next morning, Stacy, as she has been doing every weekday, essentially since her mother died, started the prayer line up. She's running the show now. And the defendant called in to pray together. And then the following Sunday, Stacy hired an Uber to take the defendant, Cherry, who was caused this wreck, to carry her to Clarkston First Baptist Church, where Rosie Minor had been a member, where a witness who had testified on our behalf and is also a member of the church, opened the doors and welcomed the defendant in with open arms. So the defendant and her family went to Rosie Minor's church on the Sunday after this trial, attended services, and joined as members.
Truly carrying on the legacy of Rosie Minor.